This is East Asia Tonight.
Hello there, good evening. I'm Telly Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. Firefighting helicopters in South Korea grounded after a deadly crash as unprecedented wildfires ravaged the country. While neighboring Japan is burning as well, with strong winds fueling flames in 3 western prefectures. Now, Seoul acquits main opposition leader Lee Jae-myung of election law violations, clearing the path for his possible presidential run. A Hong Kong-based conglomerate CK Hutchinson's sale of 2 Panama ports to a BlackRock-led group moves forward, undeterred by China's fury over the deal. And U.S. Defense Chief Pete Hegseth highlights the need for strong deterrence against China without seeking conflict during his Indo-Pacific tour that includes stops in Japan and the Philippines.
I'm Olivia Seong in Hong Kong. Now, geopolitical tensions, AI, and an aging population all set to shake up global financial systems in the years to come. But what can be done about it today? I'll bring you the conversations we've been having here at the World Economic Forum's Financial Symposium in a while.
The South Korean authorities have grounded all firefighting helicopters after a crash this afternoon killed a pilot. 24 people have died and tens of thousands forced to evacuate in what authorities say are the worst wildfires in the country's recent history. Well, South Korea has raised its forest fire crisis level to its highest nationwide, with acting President Han Duck-soo vowing an all-out effort to contain the infernos, which are now into its 6th day.
정부는 무엇보다 산불 진화를 최우선으로 가용한 인력 장비를 총동원하여 산불 확산의 고리를 단절하는 데 총력을 기울이겠습니다. 아울러 근본 산불로 피해를 입은 피해자의 조속한 일상 회복을 위하여 긴급 구호를 비롯하여 행정적, 재정적 지원에 소홀함이 없도록 하겠습니다.
Japan also battling wildfires in 3 western prefectures. Gusty winds are intensifying the blazes, with self-defense force helicopters and firefighters deployed to try and bring the fires under control. Well, Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba has instructed authorities to do everything they can to contain the fire and ensure residents' safety. Well, the wildfires in Ehime and Okayama prefectures were first reported on Sunday and continue to grow. Meanwhile, a new wildfire broke out in Miyazaki Prefecture on Tuesday. One fire in Imabari City in Ehime Prefecture has burned 306 hectares so far. Multiple houses in some areas of the city have been damaged. Well, the city has issued evacuation orders to almost 6,000 people, with 7 centers set up, accommodating 158 people. In Okayama City, evacuation orders have been announced for some areas in 2 cities. A total of 6 buildings in this area, including houses, have sustained damage. Meantime, 4 helicopters have been dispatched to Miyazaki City, with fire engines also stationed near the site. City officials say there has been no reports of injuries or damage to structures so far. A South Korean court has acquitted main opposition leader Lee Jae-myung from all charges that he violated the country's election law. Well, the ruling overturns a lower court's conviction and removes a legal obstacle ahead of his expected presidential bid. Mr. Lee says he is grateful for the court's decision. He made that comment outside the High Court, flanked by DP lawmakers who had previously lined up on both sides of the court's entrance to receive him on his way out. Local media reports say the prosecution plans to appeal the case to the Supreme Court in response. Now, in the initial trial, the lower court found that Mr. Lee made a false claim about a land development project when he served as mayor. He was also found guilty of lying during the 2021 presidential campaign and sentenced to a suspended prison term. But today, the Seoul High Court overturned the suspended jail term against Mr. Lee for lying. The decision by the Seoul High Court has now dissolved a major legal hurdle for Mr. Lee ahead of his anticipated run in the next presidential election. Well, the next presidential election could take place soon if the Constitutional Court rules to dismiss impeached President Yoon Suk-yeol from office. Mr. Lee is seen as a potential front-runner in that race. South Korea's Constitutional Court has yet to set a date for the verdict in Mr. Yoon's impeachment. A U.S. Defense Chief, Pete Hegseth, has stressed deterrence against China during a visit to a Hawaiian military base. The remarks come as he embarks on his Pacific tour, which includes stops in Guam, Japan, and the Philippines.
We are doing everything we can to deter conflict with the Communist Chinese, who we don't seek conflict with at all. But we will stand strong in deterrence and will posture troops forward. That's why we're going out to Guam and to see our friends in Japan and the Philippines.
The Pentagon chief adds that the U.S. exercises in and around the first island chain near Taiwan are not meant to be a precursor to an attack, but instead it's a show of strength with its allies. Mr. Hegseth also responded to questions about the leak of highly sensitive details on U.S. strikes in Yemen through a messaging app.
Nobody's texting more plans. I know exactly what I'm doing, exactly what we're directing. And I'm really proud of what we accomplished, the successful missions that night and going forward.
Well, U.S. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz is taking responsibility for adding a journalist to a Signal chat group discussing an attack on Houthi rebels in Yemen. Now, speaking on Fox News, he said he had built the chat, though President Donald Trump later said an unnamed colleague of Waltz had added Jeffrey Goldberg, the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic.
Look, I take full responsibility. I built the group. My job is to make sure everything's coordinated.
But how did the number? I mean, I don't mean to be pedantic here, but how did the number?
Have you ever had somebody's contact that shows their name, and then you have somebody else's number there?
I never make those mistakes.
Right? You got somebody else's number on someone else's contact. So of course I didn't see this loser in the group.
Well, the admission comes after President Trump tried to downplay the incident, calling it the only glitch in 2 months of his administration. He said no classified information was revealed and dismissed the need for any apology. Mr. Trump also reaffirmed his confidence in his top aide.
The attack was totally successful. It was, I guess, from what I understand, took place during, and it wasn't classified information. So this was not classified. Now, if it's classified information, it's probably a little bit different. But I always say you have to learn from every experience. I think it was very unfair the way they attacked Michael. He's a good person. The person that was on just happens to be a sleazebag. So maybe that's just coincidence. I don't know.
Goldberg had initially doubted the Signal group was real, but quickly realized it was, as the attack on Houthi targets played out as detailed in the chat group.
It's almost automatically true that if the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic is being given access to this kind of information, weapons systems and packages and timing and weather in Yemen and all kinds of information about sequencing of particular events, then obviously there's a security breach.
Democrat lawmakers, angered by the leak, have been grilling leaders of the intelligence community on Capitol Hill. They've called for officials involved to resign, arguing basic protocols were not followed. They say the leak had compromised the safety of Americans.
It's also just mind-boggling to me that all these senior folks were on this line and nobody bothered to even check. Security Hygiene 101. Who are all the names? Who are they? Well, it apparently included a journalist. And no matter how much the Secretary of Defense or others want to disparage him, this journalist had at least the ethics to not report, I think, everything he heard.
John Ratcliffe, the director of the CIA, denied any wrongdoing. He insisted no rules were violated in using the Signal app to communicate.
My communications, to be clear, in a Signal message group were entirely permissible and lawful and did not include classified information.
Well, let's circle back to our top story in the wildfires ravaging South Korea. Well, we have CNA's Lee Jae-myung now joining us live from Uiseong, which is one of the hardest hit regions. Yoon-suk, first up, tell us a little bit more about today's developments, what you're seeing, what are you hearing?
Well, I am here in Useong County where the fire first started on Saturday. And behind me is where the base camp has been set up here because this is where it all started. And this fire has just been spreading around the cities around here and in many of the regions around where I am now. Now, right now, as you earlier said, that, unfortunately, there was one helicopter that went down today. That was one of the 87 helicopters that were operating around this region to try and put the flames out. But unfortunately, a 73-year-old pilot went down together with that helicopter. And so all the helicopters here were grounded for about 2 hours. At about 3:30 local time, they were back in operation. And right now, it is dark here in South Korea. And so all the helicopters have come to a halt. They're not operating now because of safety concerns. But they will be operating again starting tomorrow morning. And also around me, I see firefighters. And a lot of them are from other provinces and other cities, too, because the South Korean government has said that this was a serious situation and has deployed all the firefighters from other areas around South Korea. Now, right now, authorities here are telling me that they haven't been able to contain the fire yet, put it out altogether. They say about 67% of the fire have been put out so far, but they have been running into a lot of difficulties, especially this gusty wind here around this region. Now, right now, you don't really feel the wind, but throughout the day, apparently the winds were very strong, and so they've run into that difficulty, and also the dry season. Now, in recent years in South Korea, it's been really dry, and unfortunately, there's just been no rainfall here. And in fact, the last time that South Korea saw any rainfall was sometime in early March, and so for the last 3 weeks or so, it's just been very dry here, and we've seen that in recent years, especially with the winter ending and it's the start of the spring season. And that's why many of the firefighters here are going through that difficulty. There is some good news that there will be some rainfall tomorrow, but right now the weather agency says that there's only going to be about 5 millimeters to 10 millimeters of rain. And so many experts are saying that they don't think it is going to help to put out this fire, but it is better than nothing, but that they are hoping for more rain. Now, around here is the Andong city, which is only about 1 hour away from here, and that's place where there's like 2 UNESCO sites, and one of them is the Hae Maul, the Hae village, which is known for its historical, is a historical village known for its traditional homes, where many of the people still live there the way that they have, hundreds of years ago. And there were lots of concerns yesterday that that place could go up in flames, but apparently the authorities are saying that because of the change of wind, the direction, that they were able to keep the fire away from there, and they do have place around those UNESCO sites to make sure that it doesn't go up in flames. But they are running into a lot of difficulties, and the authorities here say that they will be going back into, into full operation tomorrow with all the helicopters running too. And right now, around me here too, people have been working nonstop, and that's why a lot of the experts here are saying that despite everything and the good work that the firefighters have been doing, it really is becoming difficult for them, and a lot of them are just exhausted. But authorities say that they will do all they can to try and put out the fire tomorrow morning.
This is unprecedented wildfire situation we're seeing in South Korea. We've heard the acting president, Han, he's called on the country to cooperate in relief efforts. You talked about the firefighters coming from all around South Korea. How else are the rest of the nation pitching in to help contain this problem?
Well, every time there is a disaster here in South Korea, you do see, the companies in South Korea is all rallying support, and they do come quickly together to try and help and donate as much as they can. And in fact, many of the South Korean companies have come forward pledging, funds for the rescue and relief efforts. In fact, you have South Korea's biggest conglomerate, Samsung, offering about $2 million for the relief efforts. You also have Hyundai, which has pledged about $1.2 million. And apart from those big conglomerates, some of the food companies have come forward donating many of the food and water and other essentials especially for those who've been displaced, who have had to leave their house as soon as possible. And there are more than 27,000 of them. And so, South Koreans are coming together to help in whichever way that they can for the residents who have had to leave their homes.
Right, and really hoping for lots and lots of rain tomorrow. Thanks so very much for that report, CNA's Lee Jae-myung live from Ulsan, South Korea. We're going to go for a short break now, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, Hong Kong's CK Hutchison looks set to proceed with the sale of its Panama Canal assets, despite signs of Beijing's displeasure. Plus,
tariff is bad, but the permanent tariff is even worse.
Trade tensions part of the discussion at the World Economic Forum's Financial Symposium in Hong Kong. We hear more on what investors are looking out for when East Asia Tonight returns. From geopolitics to funding innovation and artificial intelligence, just some of the items on the discussion table at the World Economic Forum's Financial Symposium in Hong Kong. Titled Financial Services for the Intelligent Age, the symposium convenes top policymakers, industry leaders, and academics to discuss trends shaping global finance. And CNA's Olivia Seong is standing by live with more. Olivia, first up, give us a sense of where the discussion is headed when it comes to all these investment trends.
I'll tell you, I'd like to give you some context first. The whole of this week, Hong Kong has really been on a charm offensive, holding a whole series of conferences related to investment and finance like we have seen today, as it really tries to boost its position as a global financial hub. And today we also heard from the Hong Kong Financial Secretary, Paul Chan, who continued to make his pitch that Hong Kong has a unique position in being able to help investors to reach the huge market of mainland China. He also interestingly talked about how the narrative has changed, less about China's economic headwinds. As we know, the drag with the real estate sector continues, weak domestic consumption. Instead, he chose to focus on where the bright spots are, and that's in the technology sphere. He said that China is now to investors being seen again as being investable, and that's has a lot to do with that DeepSeek moment relating to the breakthrough by the Chinese firm DeepSeek with its open source AI model. There was a lot of talk throughout the day about the applications of AI, how to fund innovation, but I also spoke to Fred Hu, who is the founder of Primavera Capital Group, about whether this buzz surrounding DeepSeek and the stock market rally with tech is sustainable for China as a new economic growth engine. Have a listen.
China is not just the flavor of the moment, right? So China, given the sheer size, scale, and speed of transformation. So China should be a long-term structural opportunity for global investors, for multinational companies, right? It's GDP, right? Second largest, growing at 5%. That's the biggest growth opportunity in the world at the moment. And earlier we talked about DeepSeek. Is also China is now really a formidable leader in technological innovation. China is also the undisputed global leader in energy transition, in renewables, in EV, in batteries. So, so for global investors, China represents like a very large opportunity for the diversification, for seeking growth, for diversification of risk.
Well, but the interest in the tech sector perhaps has this looming shadow of global geopolitical uncertainty and what is anticipated as an intensifying trade war between China and the US, with potentially more tariffs being announced by the Trump administration. And I asked Mr. Hu what he thought about that, but he did say that even though investors for now seem to have most of their investment or money parked in the US tech sector, because the focus has been there, understandably for now, the breakthrough with DeepSeek is showing that China does have its upside. Have a listen.
China is not, not Singapore, right? So for small open economy, which is highly more dependent on trade, right? Then if you're subject to a very high tariff, you're very vulnerable. But China is the biggest trading economy, so of course China is very vulnerable. But at the same time, China is also has enormous domestic market, right? Huge middle class space. So, if China, does right to lift up confidence of average Chinese consumers, if they are willing to spend, domestic demand picks up, then that will more than offset whatever the drag caused by tariffs. Tariff is bad, but the permanent tariff is even worse, right? So, I hope the two governments, i.e., U.S. government and Chinese government, will still put the highly charged emotions aside, come to the table to negotiate, to strike a deal.
Ollie, you're talking about, tackling all the investment rage right now, but something else that is actually weighing on investors' minds are these demographic trends. And I believe you just moderated a panel on it. Curious to know what came out of it. What were some of the issues being discussed?
I'll tell you, let me paint the picture for you here with some statistics. By 2050, the global population will have about 1.6 billion people that are aged 65 and older, and that works out to about 1 in 6 people. And in Asia, by 2060, about 60% of the world's population will be aged 65 and older, and that is a huge seismic shift in the demographics that's going to change the way that all of us live, work, and save. And the World Economic Forum released a report on this, cautioning that society as a whole seems to be largely unprepared for this demographic shift. It advocated for a rethink of financial resilience, calling for changes in the areas of public retirement systems, helping people to manage their finances, to have an income stream in retirement, and also, interestingly here as well, calling on employers to do their part in this.
It's actually pretty intuitive, but like you said, it's a mindset shift for many, many people. And one of that is just invest in your health and wellness. If you invest in your health and wellness, you will actually be able to mitigate the medical expenses that will pile up during your retirement phase. So it's pretty simple, but that is a mindset change.
So
right?
How do we get there? What sort of reforms are needed?
Well, I think from an employer perspective, you have to promote that in the workplace, right? You've got to think about maybe looking at preventative care much more than you have in the past. And it's a fine line, because this means added cost to the employer, right? And you're going through quite a difficult environment now where medical inflation is on a high, so cost is high. But I think there is a shared responsibility between individual and employer to really embrace this idea of health and wellness.
Now, technology and the rapid development of artificial intelligence, as we have seen being discussed here today, also coinciding with this demographic trend. And on the panel that you saw just there, we also spoke about how this could provide opportunity and could be an equalizer in helping people of all life stages plan better for their retirement. But of course, many challenges ahead that still need to be addressed to reframe this aging issue as we move into the years ahead. I'll tell you.
Well, we simply have to embrace health and wellness, as what's being said on the panel. Thank you so very much for that report, Olivia Song, live from the World Economic Forum's Financial Symposium in Hong Kong. Right, time now for another break, but coming up on East Asia tonight, Philippines seeks to expand the Squad, an informal multilateral group to include South Korea and India. And the US says that Russia and Ukraine have agreed to a ceasefire in the Black Sea after 3 days of peace talks in Saudi Arabia. This is East Asia tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. Firefighting helicopters in South Korea grounded after a deadly crash as unprecedented wildfires ravage the country. Neighboring Japan is burning as well, with strong winds fueling flames in 3 western prefectures. Seoul acquits main opposition leader Lee Jae-myung of election law violations, clearing the path for his possible presidential run. And Hong Kong-based conglomerate CK Hutchinson's sale of its Panama Canal assets reportedly to proceed, undeterred by China's fury over the deal. Singapore and China have reaffirmed strong bilateral ties as both sides celebrate 35 years of diplomatic relations. Well, Singapore Deputy Prime Minister is in Beijing, where he met with Chinese Vice President Han Zheng at Diaoyutai State Guest House.
You have contributed significantly to the deepening of relationship between China and Singapore. And as you said earlier, we have co-chaired the Joint Council for Bilateral Cooperation for 4 years, including 2 during the COVID.
我在这里要感谢王立杰副总理对中新关系发展所做出的重要贡献，向您表示衷心的感谢啊！每一次和你交谈呢，你都从发自内心的说了一些推动中新关系的一些想法、一些建议啊！每一次呢，我们都谈得非常的好。
DPM Heng met Liu Jianchao, Chinese Minister of the International Department of the Communist Party, yesterday. Mr. Heng noted how they agreed to keep up the momentum of bilateral exchanges and encourage greater mutual understanding. Well, he also visited Peking Union Medical College Hospital, as well as internet giant Baidu's Apollo Park, where he discussed science and tech innovations. The Philippines and its allies are trying to expand the Squad grouping to counter China. Manila's Armed Forces chief has said that they're trying to get South Korea and India into the fold. Well, the Squad is an informal grouping made up of the US, Japan, Australia, and the Philippines. Their defense forces have held joint maritime drills in Philippine waters in the South China Sea since last year. A Philippine General Romeo S. Brona named South Korea and India as potential new Squad partners at a security forum in New Delhi last week. Well, he said they had a, quote, common enemy, and it was important to collaborate and possibly exchange intelligence. Japan did not say whether it has agreed to the group's expansion, but its defense ministry did say building and expanding networks of allies was important because it is facing the most severe and complex security environment since World War II. South Korea and India have not commented so far. Neither has China specifically, but the Chinese Foreign Ministry yesterday commented on the Philippines' military cooperation with the U.S., telling Manila not to become the, quote, mouthpiece for other countries. Well, circling back now to the World Economic Forum symposium in Hong Kong, geopolitical uncertainty is one of the key discussion points at the event. CNA's Mei Wong sat down with Matthew Blake, head of the WEF's Center for Financial and Monetary Systems, and he explained how businesses are preparing for potential risks and market volatility.
We're seeing what I would say is an unprecedented amount of uncertainty. I think that notion of uncertainty is playing into the projections over the next 12 to 24 months. And so the implications on an economic basis is that companies stop spending because they don't like uncertainty. And if you're an individual, there too you see stock markets up one day, down the next. There's more volatility, and that's scary. And so as human beings, we say, whoa, there's something going on here. We too are going to pause. And so those effects slowly trickle through the broader economy on a national level, and when you add it all up on a global level.
Hong Kong is actually quite bullish, right? It wants to really push ahead to restore the growth that it experienced pre-pandemic. However, they've not really been achieving that. How do you think this economy in particular can kind of re-strategize and really work its way into attracting some of the liquidity that it really wants here?
I think this is a really interesting week for Hong Kong because not only do you have our event, which is a unique one, you also have a number of other convenings that are ongoing. So I think that's a way to add magnetism to Hong Kong, to build allure and to put it on the map in a very powerful and global way. And I think taking steps like that will be accretive. And we're starting to see capital flows into China. And Hong Kong is unique in that respect because it is the bridge to the mainland and also internationally. So I think those are positive dynamics for Hong Kong.
Increasingly as well, is there a concern that perhaps national interests may overtake decisions regarding profit making? Because we have seen examples of recent days that corporations now struggle between balancing protecting national interests and also money making.
The government plays an important role by creating a level playing field. and setting the rules of engagement. Less so interventionalist. And what I mean by that is a government coming in and telling, let's say, an investor, you need to buy this, or you need to exit that. And now that we're in a more complex geopolitical environment, where national interests are at the forefront, there is an inclination from governments to play a more forceful role in those discussions. And we're seeing some of that play out around the world.
But how concerning is that?
I think it's a new paradigm. Today, we're seeing many of these firms build out specific geopolitical teams to help assess some of these dynamics in a very analytical and in-depth way. You're seeing firms recognize this changing environment in front of them and taking steps to try and better understand it.
You talked about how the trade war is causing some investor jitters as well. And interestingly, you've got a report that's just been launched regarding the trends of retail investors. And we have seen how your report has highlighted, let me quote here, 30% of Gen Zs are starting to invest in their early adulthood. What does this really mean for the retail sector going forward?
This is our second iteration of that report. The first one we published back in 2022, and we've built off those findings. We've surveyed over 13,000 people in 13 markets. Asia is a big part of that geographic mix. The fact that younger individuals, aided by technology, are able to access markets is a phenomenal development. So the more participation that you have from institutions and individuals, that's a real positive. I think the question, though, is doing that responsibly and having the understanding of how markets work and how to deploy money over the long term.
And that goes into your other new report as well. So how does that square with the fact that you have very young retail investors right now taking higher risks and also, going ahead to invest in very different products, and yet they're not saving enough perhaps for retirement in the future, and that's what we're seeing. So how do you think that's going to play out and affect retirement schemes in the future?
The key really is understanding the principles of savings. So concepts like compounding interest, like just compounding in general. That's such a powerful mechanism to create wealth over time. But you need to have a discipline and an understanding on how it works. Also, you had mentioned debt. Debt can be beneficial in certain circumstances, but it can also come back to bite you.
Given what you know from the reports that you have put out and also the uncertainties of the global economy, what kind of an outlook are we looking for the rest of the year, for example?
There's uncertainty and there's volatility. Those things go together. Back to what the World Economic Forum does, I think it's really important for platforms like ours, and there are others, but like ours in particular, to bring people together during times of uncertainty and to maintain dialogue. Because what we see is when dialogue breaks down, things go off the rails. So I think we play a really important role, be it here in Hong Kong, bringing financial services leaders together with policymakers, but ditto around the world. Same reflection for anywhere in the world. So these are all important things for us to stay focused on.
The U.S. says it has reached separate agreements with Ukraine and Russia to pause their attacks in the Black Sea and on each other's energy sites. The deals brokered by the U.S. and Saudi Arabia are the first formal commitments by Moscow and Kyiv since President Donald Trump took office. Well, the U.S. leader has been pushing for a swift end to the war. But there appears to be some disagreement on when the Black Sea deal will come into effect. Moscow says sanctions affecting its agriculture exports will need to be lifted first. It also wants links between some Russian banks and the international financial system to be restored. Well, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky insists this is untrue. He says his team asked the U.S. delegation, and they believe the truce comes into force the moment U.S. publishes the agreements. The White House says U.S. will help restore Russia's access to the world market for agricultural and fertilizer exports, lower maritime insurance costs, and enhance access to ports and payment systems for such transactions. But the statement does not make the truce conditional to these steps. Mr. Trump, in an interview with Newsmax, acknowledged that Russia may be trying to delay ending the war. Both Moscow and Kyiv say they will rely on Washington to enforce the accords. Well, the Ukrainian leader said that if Russia broke the deal, he would ask Mr. Trump to impose more sanctions on Russia and supply more weapons to Ukraine.
Те, як Росія буде себе вести найближчими днями, покаже багато чого. Якщо не все. Якщо знову повітряні тривоги, якщо знову військова активність в Чорному морі, якщо знову російські маніпуляції та погрози, то треба буде вживати нових заходів. Саме проти Москви.
Hundreds of Palestinians joined an anti-Hamas protest in northern Gaza yesterday in a rare show of dissent against the militant group. It was said to be the largest demonstration against Hamas since the war began. Crowds took to the streets demanding Hamas step down from power and calling for an end to the war with Israel. The anti-Hamas rally comes a week after the Israeli army resumed its military campaign in Gaza following a 2-month ceasefire. Masked militants later intervened and forcibly dispersed the protests. Hamas has yet to comment on the demonstrations. Observers say that open criticism of the militant group has grown in Gaza since the war started, though there are people that are still loyal to them. More than 700 Palestinians, mostly women and children, have been killed, and thousands dispersed again after a rocket fire returned to the enclave last week. Scores have been forced to flee Jabalia after the Israeli military issued fresh evacuation orders in all northern border towns.
زوجي فقدته في الحرب، في حرب الإبادة هذه فقدت زوجي وفقدت البيت وفقدت المال، فقدت كل شيء، ما ضلش شيء. معي 3 أولاد كل يومين وأنا نزحف بمكان فيش بيت، خيمة أنا ما استلمتش خيمة إني أحطها وانقلها وين مكان، أنا وين بدي هالقطة أروح.
Gaza's health ministry says at least 60 people were killed in Israeli attacks in the last 24 hours. Several aid groups and the UN have said there are no longer any safe areas in Gaza, with shelters repeatedly coming under Israeli attack. International charity Save the Children have called the resumption of the war a, quote, death sentence for children in the besieged enclave. Now, in the occupied West Bank, a violent standoff between Israeli settlers and Palestinians prompted military intervention and the arrest of 3 men. Now, it's said to have been sparked by settlers who tried to steal sheep from Palestinian farmers. And one of those detained was an Oscar-winning documentary director who has since returned home.
The director of an Oscar-winning documentary about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict was released from Israeli detention on Tuesday. Hamdan Balal, who co-directed the film No Other Land, said he was assaulted by Israeli settlers in the occupied West Bank after filming them attacking his neighbor's house.
I went there to document what's happened there. I'm just filming 2 shots. And then when I saw the settlers, it's like become more and more and attack, throw stones and destroyed everything. I back to my house because I was so scared if they coming to my family and my kids.
He spoke to Reuters from a hospital in Hebron. He said after he retreated, he was beaten by both settlers and Israeli soldiers. He told Reuters he was frightened for his family.
And you can imagine your family, your kids inside the home, and you need to protect them, okay? You just close the door and you are outside filming what's happening when the soldiers and the settler, Shem Tov Vlosky, he's coming. Because in that moment, just I was thinking about my family and my kids.
Israeli police arrested 3 men, including Balal. The Israeli military said police and soldiers intervened after Palestinians threw rocks at the vehicles of Israeli citizens and later at Israeli security forces. In a statement, the military said, quote, the forces apprehended 3 Palestinians suspected of hurling rocks at them, as well as an Israeli civilian involved in the violent confrontation. Balal's film No Other Land documents the displacement of a Palestinian community and was co-directed by Palestinian and Israeli directors. European countries and the previous U.S. administration of President Joe Biden have imposed sanctions on violent Israeli settlers, but under President Donald Trump, the White House has removed them.
Coming up in East Asia tonight, Could bubble tea extinguish the trade fire between the US and China as it prepares to open its first store in the US? China's Chagee has also filed to trade on the Nasdaq. Details when we return. Hello again. More business stories now on East Asia tonight. Now, Hong Kong's largest conglomerate, CK Hutchison, is reportedly proceeding with a port deal with an American-led consortium. The move comes even as China criticized its decision to sell 2 of its Panama Canal port assets to US asset manager BlackRock earlier this month. Now, Bloomberg says, citing multiple sources, parties involved are poised to sign an agreement by April 2nd. The consortium, which includes BlackRock, is currently engaged in due diligence, tax and accounting processes necessary for the transaction. This sale is part of a broader $19 billion deal encompassing 41 ports owned by CK Hutchison, which is progressing as planned, despite scrutiny from Chinese authorities. Now, the exclusive 145-day negotiation period limits the involvement of other potential bidders, including state-owned Chinese firms. Concerns have been raised in China regarding the sale, with officials reportedly assessing the deal for possible violations of national security and antitrust regulations. But that's because the agreement gives the U.S. control over key docks along either side of the Panama Canal, which the country's president touts as Washington's reclamation of the strategic waterway. Well, CK Hutchison's shares rose as much as 3.9% in Hong Kong this morning before paring back some of those gains. Alibaba and BMW are teaming up to use AI in cars for China. Well, the German car maker is looking at adopting artificial intelligence technology from an Alibaba-backed unit, Banma, for upcoming models in the Asian nation. The new intelligent personal assistant will offer parking as well as real-time traffic light information. The Chinese tech giant says the technology has already been used in cars produced by some Chinese automakers, including Xpeng, Zeekr, and Leapmotor. BMW says the AI enhancements will debut in models produced in China starting from 2026. Well, looking at the share reaction, Alibaba shares ending the day in the green. In Hong Kong, the stock up 1.1%. BMW shares are trading in Frankfurt, currently in the red, by 0.2%. Now, China's milk tea brand, Chagee, has filed for a US IPO even as tensions remain high between Washington and Beijing. The company is seeking to trade on the Nasdaq using the ticker CHA. Well, the filing comes as the company prepares to open its first US store in Los Angeles in a few months. Since its founding in 2017, the company has expanded its international footprint and grown to more than 6,400 tea houses across China, Malaysia, Singapore, and Thailand. Roughly 97% of its locations are still in China. Chagee said it generated net income of $344.5 million from a revenue of $1.7 billion in 2024. Well, the company says it wants to expand its international operations to 100 countries and serve 15 billion cups of tea annually. Right now, let's take a look at how the markets in East Asia closed. Japan's Nikkei 225 basically ending the day 0.65% in the green. Kospi looks like they are the winner in the region, up more than 1%, hitting its highest level in over a month. Well, the market rally is despite the political uncertainty that remains in South Korea, with the country expecting a ruling on impeached President Yoon Suk-yeol very soon. Well, it was the Korean chip and battery makers that rallied on hopes of improvements in their industry outlook. A battery maker LG Energy Solution jumped 7.3% to record its biggest daily gain since early November 2023. While peer Samsung SDI rose 3.22%, while battery materials maker LG Chem climbed some 4.82%. Chip maker SK Hynix ended the day 2.88% in the green. Meanwhile, Hyundai Motor and sister automaker Kia Corp extending yesterday's gains by 0.9% and 0.6% respectively. The U.S. has been touting Hyundai Motor Group's plan to invest $21 billion as announced by the South Korean company's chairman and Donald Trump at the White House. Turning our attention to the yuan now, the spot rate stands at 7.26 against the greenback. Looking forward, top U.S. bank Morgan Stanley has upgraded its outlook for China's currency. It has also raised its index targets for Chinese firms for the second time this year, citing improved earnings growth and a more upbeat outlook for the economy. Well, in Taiwan, the TAIEX closed marginally in the red. Today, the central bank there sent a report to lawmakers defending the island's trade and currency record ahead of possible tariffs from U.S. President Donald Trump. Well, Taiwan runs a large trade surplus with the United States, which surged 83% last year. The island's exports to the U.S. hit a record $111 billion last year, driven by demand for high-tech products such as semiconductors. Taiwan's central bank said its report that the high current account surplus was a structural problem that Washington understood. The report says the risk of bilateral trade disputes between Taiwan and the U.S. must be carefully managed because of that large surplus. Now, NVIDIA's annual software developer conference in San Jose, California, has been likened to a rock concert, complete with CEO Jensen Huang in his black leather jacket. Well, CNA's Tan Tzu-Hui was actually one of the 20,000 attendees to catch all the action at this year's edition. And in this week's episode of the CNA Correspondent podcast, she tells us about her experience and her take on the person behind the persona.
What's it like being in the same room as him?
No notes, no prompter. Maybe he is AI himself. Who knows? So bold and really smart for sure. Mystique, somewhat. I mean, since the first time I first met him in Beijing at the company's Chinese New Year appreciation event in January, that was considered a low-key event. But first impressions, well, he's kind of like a rock star. You know, he has this sort of presence when he goes on stage. He's humorous. Everyone was taking selfies with him by the end of it. It just shows how accessible he is. The same thing happened at the end of the press Q&A session at this year's GTC event. Reporters also wanted to have a selfie with him, so he's almost like the Taylor Swift of AI. But at the same time, I've been trying to get a one-on-one interview with him on CNA, so that's been really hard. If Mr. Huang is listening, you know, CNA wants that interview with you.
And you can catch the rest of that interesting episode and other behind-the-scenes conversations with our global team of reporters on our podcast, CNA Correspondent. It's available on our website, CNA or Me Listen apps, as well as Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And that's all we've got for you, East Asia Tonight, this Wednesday. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. Thanks for your company.